Hello, investigators, and welcome to Until the End of Time. My name is Veronica. It is the start of September, and you know what that means. It's time to talk more previews for the Scarlet Keys. I have three cards to talk to you about, but more importantly than that, we have the last of the six investigators from this box. Vincent Lee was previewed just this last weekend. I am very excited to talk about him. I was expecting there to be another preview today, so I delayed recording this video just to make sure that I could get that one in. And then it turns out I read the schedule wrong, and there's not actually a preview today. The next preview is tomorrow, so that's going in the next video. Alright, with no further ado, let's talk Vincent Lee, previewed by Drawn to the Flame with special guest Fillion. They did a fantastic job with the preview, and I was very excited to tune in for that live stream. Vincent Lee is the Doctor, and I believe he's one of those classic Eldritch Horror characters that people have been clamoring to see in the LCG for a long time. I have not played a lot of those games, but I understand that he's a classic, and people are excited to see him. So let's talk about what he does. He's the Doctor, he has 3 willpower, 4 intellect, 3 combat, 1 agility, which I believe is some kind of in-joke. Post in the comments if you know what that's about. He's a medic, and he has the ability, after one of your card effects heals damage from an investigator or an investigator's ally asset, add one of your set-aside on-demand skills to that investigator's hand. And then a Elder Sign effect, +1. You may heal 1 damage from an investigator or ally asset at your location. I will find the answers, even if it kills me. 9 health, 6 sanity. Like Carolyn Fern, he has 1 fewer stat points compared to most investigators, but he gets an extra point of health to compensate. Well, health or sanity, he's slightly more health or sanity, he's a bit more beefy. And that's not where the comparisons to Carolyn are going to end, because his deck building is very similar. He has a deck size of 30, deck building options are Seeker cards 0 to 3, neutral cards 0 to 5, cards that heal damage 0 to 5, so you can take any card that heals damage, and then he has up to 15 other Guardian and or Survivor cards 0 to 1. So like Carolyn, he can only take 0 to 3 from his main class, but then he can take 15 cards, half of his deck potentially, off of his off classes in Guardian and Survivor. Note that in addition to that, he doesn't have the requirement that he cannot bring any XP weapons, which is one that Carolyn does have. I think this is probably because with Seeker as his main class, he doesn't have that many big weapons that he can take anyway, so they decided to omit that. His deck building requirements are the Bone Saw, 1 per investigator's copies of On Demand, which, as again, that's related to his reaction ability, the weakness card Wounded Bystander, and then 1 random basic weakness. As an additional setup, you begin each game with 1 per investigator copies of On Demand set aside out of play. So we're going to talk about his signatures. Before I get there, I just want to give a quick content warning for blood and gore in a medical context. I know most of you will probably be fine, and it's a card game, so it's less impactful than most video or like video game stuff. But I just wanted to give a quick warning because I understand if it's not your thing. Go ahead and skip ahead. I'm gonna try to do my best to put a little annotation in the description for where you can safely skip to skip the stuff you don't want to see. All right, so On Demand, he gets up to 4 of these depending on the player count, and they are a skill with the innate trait, and that reads limit 1 On Demand in your hand, commit only to a test you are performing, and forced, when On Demand will be discarded from anywhere, set it aside out of play instead. It has 2 wild icons. So it is essentially a more restricted unexpected courage. Whenever Vincent heals somebody, he gets to give them +2 to a future test they are performing in the form of this skill card that they can give. He can only give them 1 at a time, basically, or you can give them to multiple people, but 1 person can only have 1 of these at a time, and that actually, I think, impacts how you want to play Vincent, but I'll get to that more in a moment. Let's talk about the other other signature card first, which is the Bone Saw. It is a 3-cost asset with the intellect, combat, and wild icons, item, tool, and melee traits, Vincent Lee deck only. A action to fight, you get +2 combat for this attack. If this attack is successful, you may take 1 damage to deal +1 damage for this attack. So note that you don't have to take the damage if you fail. And an action, heal 5 damage from an investigator at your location, but then you have to test intellect 4, and if you fail, then investigator suffers a physical trauma, max once per game. I love that second ability. I don't think it's very good, but I love that you can try to stitch somebody up, but be careful, because if you don't like if you mess up, they're gonna be feeling it for the rest of the campaign. Note that that max once per game is on the entire ability, not just the failure effect. So once you've tried that, you can't use it again for the rest of the scenario. I think the Bonesaw is a pretty powerful little tool. +2 combat brings him to a 5, which combined with some skill cards or his on-demands makes him a pretty reliable fighter. It's not the most damage, but I think Vincent with the Bonesaw is going to be pretty good at just holding his own when it comes to enemies. And keep in mind he can take Guardian cards, so he can take the Machete, he can take Enchanted Blade, he can take Vicious Blows, lots of cards he can take to help fend for himself. Finally, his weakness is the Wounded Bystander. On Death's Doorstep, this is an asset weakness with the Ally and Bystander traits. Revelation, put him into play in your play area with 3 damage on it. It cannot leave play while it has damage on it unless it's defeated. If it has no damage, discard it. Forced, when you take non-direct damage, at least one of it must be assigned to Wounded Bystander if able, and if Wounded Bystander is defeated, you suffer a mental trauma. 5 health, no sanity. Doesn't take up any slots, it's not like it's gonna boot out your ally slot or anything, but this is basically entering play as 3 out of 5 damage already taken, and then whenever you take damage, the Wounded Bystander is going to start bleeding out. I think this is a very interesting weakness design. I actually really like the weakness design here, because it's tricky. You have to run healing cards, but you don't have to clear this guy. If he's in play at the end of the scenario, there's no problem. So as long as you can stop him from bleeding out, you don't have to clear him. One thing that I do want to note is that the wording of that first force effect is a bit different than the things we've seen on the composures, which are that you have to put damage on them if you're not soaking it on anything else. That's not how the bystander works. If you are taking any amount of non-direct damage, one of it has to go on the bystander, even if you have other soak assets. So this also shuts off cards like Jessica Hyde. And that's kind of honestly more punishing maybe than other effects. And unfortunately, there's not actually a lot of cards that can heal damage from ally assets, especially at level 0. We have the bandages and emergency aid are as 2 that really stand out to me, and there's a couple more, but I think there's only like 6 or 7 cards in the entire card pool. And none of them are in the core set or in Scarlet Keys as far as we know. And I think that's very important. I should clarify, there are no level 0 cards in the core set, because I believe there is 1 XP card in the revised core set that does heal allies. The reason why that matters is that they obviously aren't going to release a weakness like this in a box and not give you some way of mitigating it. So there's almost assuredly going to be a card in Scarlet Keys, possibly multiple cards that deal with this. We just haven't seen those yet. Keep that in mind when evaluating Vincent. Until we have seen the entire box and know, or the relevant healing cards, we're gonna have to be a little, we're gonna have to wonder exactly how we're gonna deal with this bystander. But I think for now, emergency aid is a good way to get the wounded bystander off the table quickly, because it heals 2 damage at once. While the bandages aren't great for getting the bystander off the table, because they can only heal after you've taken damage, but they do let you keep him around for a lot longer. And their item, which is gonna matter in a minute. We'll get to that. Alright, so that's the horrific imaging. Okay, so bad. It's not that bad. I shouldn't exaggerate. That the signature's done. Now I want to talk about Vincent, especially in comparison to Carolyn, and kind of talking about healing in general. So one of the kind of crucial elements of why healing in Arkham is often considered to be kind of a bad thing is this concept known as tempo. So tempo is vague and hard to describe, and has a lot of this you know it when you see it vibe. But a lot of the time when we're talking about tempo, we are talking about the ability to accomplish our objective without slowing down. So to keep making progress without having to stop and play cards or do whatever. And it is also the ability to overcome your obstacles between you and the objective. Now in Arkham, in contrast to a lot of the competitive games, your objective is always going to be set. It is the act cards, and the obstacles are the encounter deck and the agenda card. Kind of this slowing down tempo is often going to be viewed as relative to the agenda, right? The doom clock. And I think that's very important because healing is inherently a very slow tempo thing, right? You are not moving towards your objective. You are in fact slowing down to compensate for an obstacle that you have already passed, right? It is damage that you have already suffered that you are now slowing down to take care of. And for that reason, healing is usually considered kind of inefficient or slow. And the investigators that we have, Vincent and Carolyn, who care about healing, help us by compensating for our healing. So both of them give you a benefit when you heal somebody. In Vincent's case, he gives you On the Mend, which is a skill card with 2 wild icons, whereas Carolyn gives you a resource. But the way that these cards differ really changes how I think they should be played, even when compared to one another. The thing is, Carolyn's ability is just going to scale up the more she does it, right? The more resources you can gain from Carolyn's ability, the better it is. And so you can build engines with Carolyn with cards like Peter Sylvester and Forbidden Knowledge, which give you a massive amount of money and that let you build up a big resource pile, which you can then use to do some really powerful things. Cards like Dynamite Blast, which are normally too expensive for most guardians to run, become powerful tools in Carolyn who can easily afford to run them. Vincent doesn't work that way. Vincent gives you a skill card, but it's only if you don't already the uh, have one in play. So, or sorry, if you have one in your hand. So you have to build with that in mind. You can't keep building up. You can't just stockpile these on the lands. And that's, I think, the big difference with Carolyn. Vincent is going to rely on you keep pushing forward, keep making progress, keep spending that tempo essentially, keep trying to get closer to your objective, and then when you've made some progress, then you pause and then you heal up. At which point you get your signature or your skills again to go and push further. Right? It kind of is this rhythm where you push, you get hurt a little, you heal up, you get cards, you can push again. And I think with that in mind, kind of burst healing and like cheap, fast healing is going to be very important, more so than these engines that Carolyn is known for. Moving on to a couple of deck building ideas that I've had for Vincent, I'm going to do a big review, or at least I'm hoping to do a big review down the line, same as I did with Kamani, and same as I'm still planning on doing for Daryl. Yes, Daryl. But right now, Vincent's only been out for like a few days, and I really need some time to like grok a couple of ideas. I did do a live stream yesterday, trying one of these decks, and already learned a couple of important things. So look forward to seeing perhaps more streams and just more of Vincent in the future. That being said, I think Bless Vincent is looking promising. He gets access to both the Guardian and Survivor Bless cards. He doesn't gain access to any of the relevant covenants, because the only covenant he can take is the Seeker one, but he still looks like he could be a little bit of a support with Rite of Sanctification, and use Radiant Smites to back up his already reasonable fighting skills to be able to level a big enemy. Likewise, synergy, as with Carolyn, Vincent can take a broad range of classes. I think the only class he might struggle with is Rogue. Everything else he should be able to take pretty much no problem. And there are some pretty nice cards for him here. Gang Up, again, lets you deal with enemies quickly. Join the Caravan is the Seeker one and lets you move to any location for only 1 resource if you've got 4 synergy. Strength in Numbers is going to be a massive skill, and obviously Call for Backup gives you a whole range of abilities, one of which is healing damage, so that's a good way to give On the Mend to anyone at any location, because the Survivor effect heals 1 damage from any card, regardless of location, which is pretty powerful. Speaking of skills, Vincent does of course care about skills, so you could run a card like Grisly Totem, which benefits you from committing lots of cards to skill tests. And Guided by the Unseen, of course, then also benefits you by letting you search the top 3 of your deck to try and find skills to commit. I think going a skills Vincent is going to be a very fun archetype. Maybe a little bit off the beaten path, but certainly no less for it. And finally, it wouldn't be a Veronica video if I wasn't going to talk about scavenging. At least I know for myself that I have a bias. Vincent can take scavenging. He's got a high intellect. On the Mend makes it very easy to trigger scavenging. And bandages, as well as a couple of other cool effects, are items. Specifically, the bandages are nice because if you're trying to patch up his signature weakness, you're going to have to keep these bandages in play for a while and make sure that, he doesn't bleed out. Getting to recur bandages over and over again while you're getting these on the mends seems like a reasonable way to make your way through a scenario, especially if you draw your weakness early and don't have a way to clear it. In general, scavenging is just a card advantage engine, and I am happy to put it in whoever can take it. Vincent's gonna be investigating anyway, so might as well profit off of it. And it's worth saying, for both Guardian and Survivor have the Edge of the Earth permanents care about this strategy. Geared Up gives you bonus, or lets you play any number of items for free, or sorry, not for free, for one less, and without spending an action, which could be good if you're trying to do a scavenging deck with a lot of items. And Short Supply can discard the top 10 cards of your deck, making it easier to get a fully stocked discard pile for your scavenging to benefit off of. And you can take both of those cards. So yeah. Alright, that's Vincent. That's all I have to say for now. I think he's a investigator that is probably pretty easy to pick up, but has some depth under the surface. And as you are going to play him, you're going to find that certain play patterns are better than others. You're going to figure out when to heal and when to wait, when to push your advantage and try to spend your on-demand to get ahead, and when to wait and try to, set up. And I think he's a good investigator for just about anybody. I think he's going to be reasonable in solo because you can just play some Guardian weapons, some good skill cards, and deal with enemies and investigate however you need to. But he's also good in multiplayer where you're healing your teammates and supporting them, giving them extra skill cards to help pass their tests. I'm very happy with the design, and yeah, kudos. I'm excited for this investigator. Moving on, we have 3 other cards to talk about. All of them are pretty wild. So let's. I don't know if I have a better word for that. Yeah, no, wild is good enough. So starting up, we have Eldritch Initiation, previewed by the Miskatonic University Radio. It is a 0 XP, 1 cost Mystic event with willpower and intellect icons. It is ritual traded, and it reads, for each arcane slot you have, draw 1 card, max 5. For each filled arcane slot you have, choose and discard 1 card from your hands. By both light and shadow, may dusk beget dawn, may the turning of the world lead to power everlasting. This is certainly an unusual one. It is a card that rewards you for having additional arcane slots, but it doesn't want you to actually use those arcane slots. It doesn't want you to fill those. And that's kind of the part that gets me, because I've tried Anima so far, and she's great without arcane slots, or like without spells. She can run a bunch of new cards, the Dowsing Rod, the Sickle, and do without arcane slots altogether. But then I'm not putting any cards into my deck that give her more arcane slots, because why would I? I'm not benefiting off of those. And so there's this weird tension in the card where it wants to be a card draw effect, but it rewards you for having more arcane slots, but it punishes you for putting cards in those arcane slots. I think it's worth saying that discarding 1 card from your hand isn't a bad thing. Like drawing, say, 3 cards and then discarding the worst card of your entire hand is often about as good as just drawing 3 cards, because odds are you have a duplicate of a unique card, or you have some other effect that you don't need right now. And so discarding that is fine, right? I think I like this card drawing 3 and discarding 1 more than I like it drawing just 2 cards, especially in Mystic, who often suffer under their card draw. But I think so far there's only one Mystic who I really like playing this in, and that's Lily Chen. And there's a big reason for that, and that big reason is the Dragon Pole. So the Dragon Pole is a 2-handed asset from the Edge of the Earth expansion that gives you an additional arcane slot, and then gives you a combat benefit based on how many arcane slots are filled. One of the biggest cards for Mystic to draw cards with right now is Scroll of Secrets. The Taboo Scroll of Secrets is a great draw engine, but it takes up a hand slot. And so Lily often doesn't run it because it gets in the way of her Dragon Pole. And I can very easily imagine a Lily deck who only puts down a single arcane slot early on, so that they can play the second arcane slot when they need to, but in the meantime they can Eldritch Initiation to try and find whatever critical pieces of their deck they have, and discard spare copies what they don't need. If this card is drawing you 3 cards and then discarding 1 card, I think that is a totally sensible card to play. If you want to go wild with it, I think you could try to play Familiar Spirit with the Edge of the Earth Rod of Animalism. It is a creature, so you could have, I don't know, 4 or 5 arcane slots and try to see if you can draw a whole bunch of cards. I think that's bad, but, when has that ever stopped us? I'm excited to see this card, and I think it has a place. I don't think it's going to be a strong contender for like card draw. Oh, this is powerful card draw, but more, it's functional. It'll do what you want it to do. don't include arcane slot increasing cards just to play this card. You need to have a reason to run the cards. All right, next we have Making Preparation. Strength in Numbers preview this card, and they did a fantastic job. They might have the best preview video in the entire preview season, and that's a high bar, but it is a work of art. The links to everything are in the description, but I'll make sure to put an extra link to this one, like, so you can see it, because it's a fantastic video, and you should watch it. This is one of the dilemmas, and like all dilemmas, it doesn't have a cost, and it doesn't have any icons. It is also an event. It's tactic credit. Mark can take this. It reads max 2 dilemma per round, as all dilemmas do, and it has the revelation ability choose 2 skills, willpower, intellect, combat, or agility. Until the end of the investigation phase, each investigator gets +1 to each of the chosen skills and -1 to each of the other skills. There is a certain clarity in the grim mathematics of survival. I think this card is interesting. The main challenge that I'm having with it isn't the penalty to skills, because I think it's not that hard to set up situations where 1 or 2 skills are just not going to get tested, or maybe you have a team where only one person might be testing a given skill, but they're super high on that skill anyway. I'm thinking mostly willpower and mystics, right? If you're naming willpower and you have a mystic in the party, but that mystic has willpower 7, they're not going to be like, why did you do that? Now I can't pass my tests, because they're going to pass their tests anyway. The main challenge I have with this card is figuring out a place where it's actually worth the card slot, because I feel like this has to give me at least +1 on 3 different tests for it to approach being worth a card, because you do still draw this card, right? It's still part of your draw. And to that end, I'm looking at it mostly in investigators who had a very flat stat line, and I was actually drawn to Lola Hayes, partially because of the recent debut list, obviously, but the ability to go from a 3-3-3-3 to a 4-4-2-2 actually really changes what you can do in a round, and I really like that. Keep in mind also that revelation effects are not blocked by Lola's restriction, so she can trigger survivor dilemmas even if she is not in survivor at the time, which I think is a neat thing and might be worth considering when you're trying to build your new Lola decks with the new taboo. Put some of those dilemma in. They're pretty good for her. One of the other things that I want to mention is when you draw this, it's going to trigger until the end of the investigation phase. You're probably going to draw this in upkeep most of the time, so it's going to be covering the mythos phase and the investigation phase. If you can create a circumstance where you draw this during the investigation phase, it becomes a lot better, because you don't have to worry about whatever treacheries you're going to pull, which could also be hampered by the 2 skills you choose to lower. Keep in mind that if you use a card like Resourceful or Scrounge for Supplies to get this back, it will trigger, because it triggers whenever it enters your hand. Alright, that's Making Preparation, and our last card is also a dilemma. This one is Nature of the Beast, previewed by Optimal Play. It is a 1 XP Survivor event, no icons, no cost, max 2 dilemma per round. It is inside traded, and it reads Revelation, reveal the top 3 cards of the encounter deck, choose an investigator to draw 1 of the revealed cards and discard the rest. Then choose an investigator to discover 1 clue at any revealed location. I think this card's really good. I know some people are a little skeptical on it, but I think this card is pretty strong. It's somewhere between Working a Hunch and Drawn to the Flame. You have to draw an encounter card, but the encounter card you're going to draw is whichever encounter card is the least bad out of the top 3. And it has the potential of working even better when it can discard very annoying encounter cards that you have no way of dealing with. That's more of a fringe benefit, and there are some mathematical reasons why that's not necessarily even considered a benefit. But I personally like it in lower player counts. Potentially getting rid of Ancient Evils that you were otherwise going to draw is kind of nice. And if you're a survivor, odds are drawing 1 encounter card from the top 3 isn't that bad. If it's an agility or willpower test, most survivors can tank those no problem. And then you get to discover 1 clue at any revealed location, which is pretty good. Clue acquisition at a distance especially is a thing that's not done too often, and it makes this card a little bit more reliable, because you do need to have a clue in play to find, and if it had to find a clue at your location, that was going to get a little sketchy, because you could only, there's only so much manipulation of your deck you can do before you just have to draw this thing at some point, and if you draw this while there's no clues in play, that's pretty bad. There is one investigator I think this stands out to more than most, and that is Daryl. The reason being that Daryl's camera puts evidences on enemies or treacheries when they enter play, and then he gains that evidence by discovering clues at their location. With Nature of the Beast, you can pick a treachery or enemy that is going to enter play, and then pick up a clue at that location, basically instantly giving you that evidence. Nature of the Beast seems like a fun Daryl card, and it seems like a fun card in general. I know that some people aren't completely sold on the Dilemma ID being too kind of random or too unreliable, but I'm personally here for it. I like having a little bit of, a little bit of chaos in the game. I like having a little bit of, that kind of unexpected excitement. And I think Nature of the Beast is one of the cards that is probably better than most in the sense that its upside is pretty good and its downside is probably going to be fairly mild. Before I forget, there's one other investigator I just wanted to quickly highlight, which is Patrice. As I've mentioned in previous videos, for Patrice, losing the card draw for the Dilemma isn't as bad because she draws 5 cards anyway, and she likes getting additional actions, or in this case, a clue discovery at range, more than most investigators because she doesn't get a lot of compression. And so for her, getting a clue that she otherwise would have to run all the way over to backtrack is very good, and I expect this card will be a good Patrice card. And for her, drawing an extra encounter card, if it has any kind of test on it, isn't going to be a problem. So that's the video. That's the 3 new cards: Eldritch Initiation, Making Preparation, and Nature of the Beast, as well as the long-awaited Vincent Lee. Thank you so much for watching. There are still more preview cards to come, and the release date is probably the end of this month, so a lot of exciting Scarlet Key cards yet to come. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you until the end of time.